Friends, if you want to watch the super hit movie The Strangers, Chapter 2 in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, do not forget to subscribe to our channel. In today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is The Strangers, Chapter 2, a film that continues one of the most talked about horror franchises of recent years. This video will take you through everything you need to know about the movie, including what it is about, where it can be watched, the behind-the-scenes journey, technical details, and all the exciting facts surrounding its production. Stay with me until the end, because I will also give you a breakdown of the story, the performances of the main cast, and how it stands in comparison with its predecessor. The Strangers, Chapter 2 is the direct continuation of the terrifying tale that left audiences shaken in the first film. This chapter goes deeper into the mystery, the fear, and the chilling concept of strangers who appear without reason, targeting ordinary people and turning their lives into a nightmare. This unsettling idea has always been the heart of the Strangers series, and the second chapter builds upon it with more intensity, suspense, and shocking turns. The movie not only carries the spirit of the original but also expands the world in a way that keeps fans guessing about what will happen next. From the technical point of view, the film's cinematography creates an atmosphere of dread that is both immersive and haunting. The camera angles, lighting, and set design have all been chosen carefully to build suspense and tension, making the audience feel as if they are part of the story. The sound design plays a huge role as well, using silence, sudden sounds, and a minimalist approach to heighten the scares. Music is sparingly used, but when it appears, it amplifies the emotions and drives home the sense of danger lurking in every corner. In terms of pre-production, the makers focused on staying true to the essence of the franchise while also introducing fresh ideas. The script went through several drafts to make sure the narrative had both unpredictability and depth. The casting process was also handled with precision, bringing together talented actors who could convey fear, vulnerability, and resilience. Once the planning was complete, filming began with a commitment to practical effects, real locations, and an emphasis on creating authenticity. During filming, the production team faced several challenges, including night shoots, complex stunt sequences, and weather conditions that sometimes added to the realism but also delayed the schedule. However, these difficulties ultimately paid off by giving the film a raw and gritty look that matches its dark storyline. Post-production then tied everything together. Editing focused on sharp cuts that create suspense, while visual effects were kept grounded to avoid losing the film's realistic tone. Color grading gave the movie its eerie look, with dark shadows and muted tones that fit the horror genre perfectly. When it comes to budget and box office expectations, The Strangers, Chapter 2 was designed as a mid-budget horror film, which is common for the genre. Horror often does not require massive budgets to succeed, but it depends heavily on atmosphere, strong storytelling, and performances that resonate with viewers. Early box office projections suggest that this movie has the potential to perform very well, given the fan following of the original and the anticipation surrounding the sequel. If the word of mouth is strong, it may even surpass expectations and become a major hit for the studio. Now let's talk about the story itself. Without giving away major spoilers, the plot picks up from the terrifying events of the first chapter. Once again, innocent characters find themselves trapped in a nightmare as masked strangers return to wreak havoc. The tension rises quickly as the victims struggle to survive the relentless pursuit of their tormentors. The film explores themes of fear, vulnerability, and survival, reminding viewers that danger can come without warning and without explanation. It is this sense of randomness and lack of motive that makes the story so frightening. The performances are another strong point of The Strangers, Chapter 2. Each actor brings intensity to their role, making the characters feel real and relatable. The lead actors deliver emotionally charged performances that capture the fear and desperation of being hunted. At the same time, the actors playing the masked strangers create an unforgettable presence without speaking much. Their silence and unpredictability make them even scarier. Standout moments include scenes where tension builds slowly before erupting into chaos, and moments of shocking violence that keep the audience on the edge of their seats. In conclusion, The Strangers, Chapter 2 is more than just another horror sequel. It is a carefully crafted continuation that respects its roots while adding new layers to the story. From technical brilliance to strong performances, from haunting sound design to gripping storytelling, it offers everything horror fans hope to see. If you are looking for a film that will keep you holding your breath and leave you thinking about it long after the credits roll, this movie deserves your attention. So make sure you watch it, and do not forget to share your thoughts in the comments after you have seen it. The Strangers Chapter 2 is the second film in the new trilogy directed by Rennie Harlin, and it continues the terrifying story that began in Chapter 1. This installment follows Maya, played by Madeleine Petsch, as she struggles to survive after the brutal home invasion that nearly took her life. Instead of safety and recovery, Maya finds herself once again stalked by the faceless masked strangers who seem determined to finish what they started. The film begins with Maya recovering in a hospital. She is shaken, traumatized, and constantly plagued by nightmares of the attack she barely escaped. She tries to find comfort in the idea that the ordeal is behind her, but the audience quickly learns that the killers have discovered she is still alive. The three masked strangers, known for their silence and their eerie disguises, return with full force. Their pursuit of Maya is relentless, making it clear that survival is not simply about hiding but about constant movement, endurance, and the will to fight back. The killers themselves are played by Olivia Krutsova, Letizia Fabry, and Mattis Lajkak. Their presence remains as chilling as ever, since they speak very little and show no emotion, which only heightens the horror. Their lack of motive continues to be the franchise's most disturbing theme. The idea that violence can come without warning, reason, or explanation makes the story unsettling on a deep psychological level. As Maya tries to stay alive, she crosses paths with other characters who provide brief help and human connection. Gabriel Basso plays Gregory, a character who represents a rare moment of support for Maya but whose presence only adds to the danger when the strangers widen their attacks. Emma Horvath plays Shelley, another supporting character who brings both compassion and vulnerability to the story. These roles give Maya fleeting chances to trust and rely on others, but the stranger's constant pursuit ensures that no sanctuary lasts for long. The movie shifts the setting from the isolated house in the first chapter to more varied locations. Audiences are taken from hospital corridors to rural roads, forested landscapes, abandoned stables, and lonely highways. Each new location shows that safety is an illusion and that the strangers can strike anywhere. This change of environment expands the scope of the terror, turning the sequel into a larger survival journey rather than a confined home invasion. Rennie Harlin uses these environments to stage extended chase sequences filled with sudden shocks, carefully framed camera angles, and moments of stillness that erupt into chaos. The cinematography relies on long night shoots, tight framing, and muted colors to build dread. The editing is sharp and deliberate, often cutting on a gasp or a sudden movement to keep the rhythm tense. Sound design is just as crucial as the visuals. Silence is used as a weapon, and even small noises like footsteps or creaking doors build anxiety until the next strike happens. Music is minimal but powerful, surfacing only when it can heighten fear or emotion. The story also weaves in flashbacks that give glimpses of Maya's life before the nightmare began. These moments deepen her character without giving away too much and keep the audience invested in her fight for survival. The script avoids giving the strangers clear motives or backstories, which stays true to the series' original appeal. However, there are hints through newspaper clippings and cryptic dialogue that suggest a larger pattern behind the attacks. These subtle teases are clearly meant to set up the final chapter in the trilogy while keeping viewers unsettled and curious. Madeleine Petsch carries the film with a performance that balances vulnerability with determination. Her portrayal of Maya makes the audience feel both her fear and her strength. She brings emotional intensity to scenes of desperation while also convincingly delivering the physical endurance needed for the constant chase. Gabriel Basso and Emma Horvath provide solid supporting performances that help ground the film in moments of humanity. Meanwhile, the actors behind the masks create unforgettable presences. Without needing to speak, they manage to terrify audiences through body language, timing, and their sheer unpredictability. As the story builds to its climax, the intensity never lets up. Each time Maya seems close to rescue or safety, the strangers reappear to crush that hope. The pacing ensures the audience is constantly on edge, mirroring Maya's own exhaustion and fear. The conclusion resolves some immediate conflicts but intentionally leaves several questions unanswered. This not only preserves the mystery but also sets the stage for Chapter 3, promising that Maya's ordeal is far from over. In the end, The Strangers Chapter 2 works as both a continuation and a bridge. It expands the world, raises the stakes, and keeps the franchise's terrifying core intact. With strong performances from Madeleine Petsch, Gabriel Basso, Emma Horvath, Olivia Krutsova, Letizia Fabry, and Mattis Lajkak, the movie delivers a survival horror story that is unflinching, suspenseful, and disturbing. It offers no safe ground and no easy answers, only the chilling reminder that danger can come without reason and strike again when you least expect it. The Strangers Chapter 2 opens with a stark image of Maya lying in a hospital bed, her body and mind scarred from the violence of the first film. This opening instantly sets the tone by placing us inside her trauma and showing how survival has left her shaken but not free. The setup introduces Maya's fragile mental state as she struggles with flashbacks and fears that the masked intruders will return. The film quickly makes it clear that safety is an illusion, and from this first moment the narrative warns us that the past has not been buried. The inciting incident occurs when the strangers discover that Maya has survived. The killers, faceless and silent as ever, mark her for another round of terror. Their decision to hunt her again drives the story forward and throws Maya back into a nightmare she thought she had escaped. This incident changes the trajectory of the film from recovery to pursuit, creating tension that never lets go. The rising action begins as Maya attempts to leave the hospital and rebuild her life. She crosses paths with Gregory, played by Gabriel Basso, who offers brief companionship, and Shelley, played by Emma Horvath, who adds warmth to the otherwise cold and brutal world. These new characters provide Maya with fleeting hope, but the narrative structure ensures that every moment of calm is interrupted by a new wave of violence. The strangers stalk her in hospital corridors, shadow her through rural backroads, and attack her in isolated stables. Each scene expands the geography of the story beyond the single house of the first film, showing that the killer's reach has no boundaries. The first major turning point arrives when Maya realizes she can no longer run indefinitely. She must shift from being a victim to someone who takes action. This pivot is signaled by her decision to stop hiding and confront the strangers directly, even though the odds remain impossibly stacked against her. Emotionally, this moment resonates because it shows Maya's growth. She is no longer defined by what happened to her, but by her determination to reclaim control. The mid-film sequences intensify the pursuit. Director Rennie Harlin uses extended chases and sudden jump scares to escalate the suspense. The narrative tightens by showing how little Maya knows about the strangers and how little the audience knows as well. The lack of motive or explanation is deliberate. This absence of clarity fuels the dread, because we cannot categorize or rationalize the killers. Scenes where the masked figures appear silently in the background or vanish without explanation reinforce the idea that they embody chaos itself. Another significant turning point occurs when Maya's allies are threatened. Gregory and Shelley, who offered small windows of trust and humanity, are either taken away or left vulnerable, showing that Maya cannot rely on anyone else. The story pivots again into pure survival, with Maya isolated and forced to draw upon every ounce of resilience she has left. The narrative choice to remove support systems amplifies the horror and sharpens Maya's emotional arc. The climax builds across a series of set pieces that refuse to offer relief. Whether it is a chase along a deserted road or a brutal confrontation in a darkened barn, the narrative structure denies closure until the very last minutes. These sequences are crafted to keep the audience as breathless as Maya, mirroring her panic through editing that cuts sharply and sound design that weaponizes silence. Each scene feels like it could be the end, but the killers persist, reinforcing the central theme of random violence that will not stop simply because it should. The finale does not provide neat answers. Maya fights back with everything she has, and while she survives the night, the resolution deliberately leaves open questions about the strangers themselves. We still do not know why they target their victims, and the gaps in explanation are not accidents. The narrative chooses to leave us unsettled, to remind us that not every horror has a reason. This ambiguity keeps the terror alive beyond the credits and sets the stage for the third chapter. Throughout the film, the narrative is linear but carefully paced. Flashbacks are used sparingly to show Maya's life before the attacks and to remind us of what she has lost, but the core of the story unfolds step by step without confusing timelines. This choice grounds the audience in Maya's perspective and allows the terror to feel immediate and unavoidable. The lack of complicated structure ensures that the focus remains on the emotional and physical toll of survival rather than on clever storytelling devices. Key scenes that stand out include Maya's fragile moments in the hospital, her desperate escapes across rural landscapes, and her attempts to protect the people who briefly enter her orbit. These scenes matter because they are not just about moving the plot forward but about showing the emotional peaks of fear, hope, and determination. Each turning point pivots the story into new territory, but it is the emotional weight that makes the film resonate. By the time the final beat lands, The Strangers Chapter 2 has walked us through a journey of terror that begins with trauma, rises through relentless pursuit, pivots on Maya's transformation, and ends with an uneasy survival. The narrative choices to leave motives unexplained, to strip away allies, and to emphasize atmosphere over resolution ensure that the horror lingers. It is a story built to keep audiences unsettled long after the screen goes dark. The Strangers Chapter 2 builds much of its impact not only through atmosphere and suspense but also through the way its characters evolve under extreme circumstances. At the heart of the story is Maya, played by Madeleine Petsch, whose journey is the emotional anchor of the film. When the movie begins, Maya is broken, fragile, and still living in the shadow of the traumatic home invasion she barely survived. Her primary desire is simple and human. She wants safety, peace, and the ability to put her life back together. But what stands in her way is not only the return of the masked strangers, but also her own internal scars. The film presents her as both physically vulnerable and emotionally fractured, a survivor who is not yet whole. As the story unfolds, Maya's arc becomes one of transformation. In the beginning she is reactive, haunted by nightmares, and hesitant to trust anyone. Her movements in the hospital reveal her nervous energy, and even small gestures such as clinging to a chair or flinching at sudden noises show how tightly wound she has become. These early details signal that she is still trapped by fear, even though she has survived. The stranger's reappearance forces her into action, and the audience watches as she shifts from reactive to proactive. A key turning point in her character comes when she decides that running is no longer enough. A subtle but powerful beat shows her gripping a weapon with new resolve, a gesture that signals the beginning of her transformation from hunted to fighter. By the end of the film, Maya is still traumatized, but she has changed. She is tougher, more willing to face the impossible, and far less willing to be defined as a victim. The masked strangers themselves function as more than just villains. Played by Olivia Krutsova, Letizia Fabry, and Mattis Lajkak, they represent the embodiment of chaos, cruelty, and senseless violence. Unlike many antagonists in horror films, they do not evolve in the traditional sense. Their lack of dialogue and explanation is intentional, making them symbols rather than individuals. Yet their presence does develop narratively. In the first half of the film they are shadows, figures lurking at the edges. As the story progresses they become more intrusive, more visible, and more violent, symbolizing how Maya's fear transforms from distant dread into immediate confrontation. Their role is less about change and more about amplification. They are constants that push Maya toward her own transformation. Supporting characters like Gregory, played by Gabriel Basso, and Shelley, played by Emma Horvath, add layers to Maya's development. Gregory appears as a steadying presence, someone who momentarily gives Maya the chance to feel supported. His role is not deeply expanded, but his interactions with Maya highlight her desire to trust again. A brief offhand line where Gregory promises to stay close reveals Maya's hidden longing for companionship, even as she resists it. When his safety is threatened, Maya's desperation shows that she cannot entirely detach from others, no matter how much she believes she should. Shelley, on the other hand, offers compassion and humanity. Her presence reminds Maya that even in the darkest moments people can still show kindness. But the stranger's violence strips these relationships away, leaving Maya with the painful realization that she must ultimately face the ordeal alone. Both Gregory and Shelley are meaningful additions because they provide emotional stakes beyond mere survival. Their fates directly affect how Maya sees herself and her capacity to endure. The most important dynamic in the film is the contrast between Maya and the strangers. Maya changes while they remain static, and this difference sharpens the emotional impact of the story. Each time she takes a step toward courage, the strangers respond with more brutality, forcing her to adapt again. This tug-of-war drives the tension. The masked figures never reveal motives or personal details, and that absence forces the audience to focus entirely on Maya's emotional journey rather than on understanding her attackers. Small details throughout the film reinforce the characters' arcs. For example, Maya's habit of hesitating at doorways early in the film contrasts with her decisive movements later when she storms through spaces, prepared for confrontation. Her whispered pleas in the hospital transform into firm commands during later confrontations, marking her growing confidence. Even her posture changes, shifting from hunched and guarded to upright and defiant. These subtle physical changes are just as important as the narrative beats in signaling her growth. The side characters, while limited in screen time, are not simply window dressing. They are carefully chosen to reflect Maya's emotional state. Gregory shows her desire for connection, Shelley shows her need for compassion, and both highlight how much she still craves normal human relationships despite her fear. Their loss or endangerment underlines the tragedy of her situation and the high stakes of her survival. By the conclusion, Maya's development feels earned. She has not been magically healed of her trauma, nor has she become an unstoppable action hero. Instead, the film shows a woman forced to confront her deepest fears and to discover strength she did not know she had. The strangers remain unchanging forces of terror, which makes Maya's evolution even more striking. She ends the film scarred, shaken, and still uncertain about the future, but she is no longer passive. She has shifted from survivor to fighter, and that transformation is the heart of the movie's character development. The Strangers Chapter 2 relies heavily on performance to sell its sense of terror and emotional intensity. Horror of this kind lives and dies by how believable the fear feels on screen. If the audience does not buy into the desperation of the characters, the film risks becoming hollow. Fortunately, most of the cast rises to the challenge, with standout turns that bring weight and credibility to a story driven by survival and senseless violence. The centerpiece performance comes from Madeleine Petsch as Maya. From the opening scenes, she fully embodies a survivor living on the edge of collapse. Her physicality tells as much of the story as the dialogue. She moves like someone always listening for danger, her shoulders tense and her body coiled to flee. Small gestures, like the way she grips a chair in the hospital or flinches at a sudden sound, communicate trauma without needing explanation. As the story escalates, Petsch shifts her energy from fragility to defiance. A particularly effective moment arrives when she picks up a weapon for the first time with genuine determination, signaling her transformation from hunted to fighter. Petsch balances vulnerability with grit, and her performance makes the audience invest in Maya's struggle. Without her emotional depth, the film would not hold together. Gabriel Basso as Gregory provides a solid supporting presence. He plays his role with understated calm that contrasts with Maya's heightened fear. His chemistry with Petsch works because it never feels forced. A simple line where Gregory reassures Maya lands with weight because Basso delivers it with sincerity and steadiness. While not given as much screen time as the lead, his contribution makes the fleeting moments of human connection believable, and his quiet strength gives the story temporary grounding. Emma Horvath as Shelley adds warmth to the otherwise relentless bleakness. Her performance is gentle but effective, creating a sense of compassion that briefly softens the edges of the film. She does not have explosive scenes, but her subtle reactions and concerned tone give her character presence. When danger threatens her, the impact is felt because she has built that connection with both Maya and the audience. Horvath's work shows that even small roles can matter when they are played with authenticity. The Masked Strangers, portrayed by Olivia Krutsova, Letizia Fabry, and Mattis Lajkak, are the most unusual performances to assess. They are deliberately stripped of dialogue and traditional emotional beats. Instead, their performances rely entirely on physicality, timing, and stillness. What makes them terrifying is the way they move, appear, and vanish. A tilt of the head, the way they linger too long in a doorway, or their sudden bursts of speed turn them into nightmares. It is difficult to disappear into roles that are meant to be anonymous, but the actors succeed by making their silence oppressive. Their body language becomes their voice, and their consistency keeps the menace alive. Certain moments highlight how performance heightens the script. In one chase sequence, Petsch sells exhaustion so convincingly that the audience feels her breathless panic. In another, a simple look exchanged between Maya and Gregory conveys trust more strongly than any speech could. The actors know when to lean into silence and when to push emotion, a balance that makes the film gripping. Not every performance lands perfectly. Some of the smaller supporting roles feel underdeveloped, and a few lines that should hit with force come across as filler. At times the dialogue seems more functional than emotional, and weaker delivery in these minor parts highlights the gap between the leads and the background characters. While these moments do not derail the film, they occasionally pull attention away from the intensity created by the main cast. What stands out most is how the film uses its performances to support its themes. Maya's arc is believable because Petsch invests in every beat of fear, despair, and reluctant strength. Gregory and Shelley work as emotional mirrors, reflecting Maya's longing for connection and her eventual acceptance that survival will come down to her alone. The strangers never need words because their silence is a performance in itself, one that embodies chaos and cruelty. Each actor, whether through dialogue or physical presence, contributes to the atmosphere of dread. By the time the film reaches its conclusion, the audience has traveled alongside Maya emotionally as much as narratively. That connection is built entirely on the back of Petsch's layered performance and the way the supporting cast complements her. Some minor roles may falter, but the core ensemble ensures the terror feels real. The chemistry, timing, and physical commitment of the actors turn a familiar premise into an experience that lingers. The Strangers Chapter 2 proves that horror depends on more than jump scares. It requires actors willing to fully inhabit fear, resilience, and menace. Madeleine Petsch carries the film with a commanding performance that transforms written beats into lived emotion, while Gabriel Basso and Emma Horvath provide grounding support. The masked performers deliver chilling presence through physical control. Together they make the story's tension visceral, ensuring that the horror resonates long after the credits roll. The direction of The Strangers Chapter 2 is central to how the film shapes its atmosphere of dread and despair. In horror, the director's hand is often invisible yet decisive, dictating how fear is delivered, how suspense builds, and how performances are framed. Renny Harlin approaches this installment with both a sense of tradition and his own stylistic preferences, steering the material in ways that emphasize menace and unpredictability. His choices in tone, pacing, and staging determine whether the tension grips or releases, and throughout the film there is a noticeable intent to immerse the audience in a relentless cycle of anticipation and shock. From the very beginning, Harlin establishes a mood of unease. The pacing is deliberate, giving viewers enough time to sink into the everyday world of the characters before dismantling it. Unlike films that rush to the first scare, this approach ensures the audience connects with the protagonists and recognizes the normalcy of their lives. That patience makes the intrusion of violence feel sharper. The director uses silence to his advantage, often letting scenes breathe without music or dialogue, relying instead on natural sound and the unsettling quiet of empty spaces. This slow burn method gives the sense that danger is always waiting just outside the frame. When it comes to visual style, Harlin favors atmospheric close-ups and carefully framed compositions that isolate the characters. A recurring technique is the use of depth within the frame, placing the protagonist in the foreground while leaving negative space behind them, where a masked figure can suddenly appear. This staging fuels the audience's constant scanning of the screen, heightening the paranoia. Harlin also makes use of long tracking shots during tense moments, allowing suspense to build in real time without the relief of a cut. These sequences immerse the audience in the character's perspective, turning the act of walking through a house or crossing a hallway into a nerve-wracking experience. However, Harlin does not rely solely on lingering tension. When violence strikes, he shifts into abrupt cuts and tighter framing. The rhythm of the editing speeds up to simulate panic, mirroring the character's desperation. This contrast between drawn-out suspense and sudden chaos becomes one of the film's defining stylistic signatures. It reflects Harlin's understanding of how to control audience emotion, slow them down until their guard lowers, then jolt them into shock with sudden bursts of energy. His direction of actors is equally important. The performances, particularly Madeleine Petsch's, are shaped by the way he frames emotional beats. Harlin often lingers on her reactions rather than the threat itself, making the audience feel her fear rather than simply observing the danger. This choice grounds the horror in human experience rather than spectacle. He guides his cast to avoid melodrama, encouraging subtle expressions of fear and exhaustion that make the terror believable. Even the masked strangers benefit from his direction, with their slow, deliberate movements becoming part of the film's identity. Their menace comes less from jump scares and more from the confidence of their stillness, which Harlin amplifies by letting the camera hold on them longer than expected. Not every directorial choice is flawless. At times the pacing risks becoming uneven, particularly in the film's middle stretch. Some scenes linger longer than necessary, diluting momentum and risking fatigue. A few transitions between suspense and action feel abrupt, creating jarring tonal shifts that interrupt immersion. These moments suggest that Harlin's commitment to atmosphere occasionally overrides the need for tighter flow. For viewers seeking constant forward drive, these slower passages may test patience. Despite these occasional missteps, the overall vision remains cohesive. Harlin clearly understands the DNA of the franchise and commits to preserving its central theme, the terrifying randomness of violence. His stylistic decisions emphasize inevitability, with shots that trap characters in confined frames or camera angles that dwarf them against the emptiness around them. The direction insists on the vulnerability of human beings when confronted with senseless cruelty. One of the film's strongest directorial choices is the refusal to provide comfort. There are few safe spaces in the narrative, and Harlin ensures that even quiet moments feel threatened. This consistency prevents the audience from ever fully relaxing, keeping the sense of danger alive across the runtime. It also reflects a broader philosophy of horror direction, to strip away the illusion of security and leave both characters and viewers exposed. In the climax, Harlan ties his techniques together, merging long takes with quick edits, silence with sudden sound, and close-ups with wide angles that emphasize isolation. The result is a finale that feels both chaotic and carefully constructed, reinforcing the film's identity as one rooted in controlled unpredictability. Ultimately, the direction of The Strangers Chapter 2 shapes it into more than a simple slasher. Harlan's guiding vision ensures that each scare is not only about the masked figures but about the dread of anticipation, the exhaustion of survival, and the inevitability of confrontation. His stylistic signatures, tracking shots, atmospheric close-ups, and calculated silence, define the experience. While a few pacing stumbles and tonal shifts may distract, his overall command demonstrates how directorial control makes or breaks a horror film's identity. Through his vision, the story becomes not just frightening but deeply unsettling, an experience designed to linger long after the screen fades to black. The cinematography of The Strangers Chapter 2 is one of the most critical components that transforms the film from a standard horror story into a suffocating and visually immersive experience. How the camera sees the world of the characters shapes how the audience feels about their vulnerability and the menace that surrounds them. Every decision involving framing, movement, color palettes, and lighting carries weight in establishing the tone. Far from being decorative, the cinematography is essential to building dread, guiding attention, and deepening the thematic resonance of fear and isolation. The film's framing is meticulously designed to communicate vulnerability. Wide shots are used sparingly but effectively, often placing characters in vast spaces where their smallness becomes obvious. For example, when Madeleine Petsch's character explores the seemingly empty cabin, the camera lingers in a wide frame that emphasizes her fragility against the looming dark corners and the emptiness of the background. These wide frames do more than establish geography. They communicate powerlessness, as though the environment itself is swallowing her. Conversely, tight framing is employed during moments of immediate danger, pressing the audience into the character's limited point of view. Extreme close-ups highlight facial expressions of fear, trembling hands, or the glint of a knife, forcing viewers to share the claustrophobia of the moment. This oscillation between wide and tight framing creates a rhythm of exposure and suffocation, a visual pulse that mirrors the character's shifting states of hope and panic. Camera movement also plays a vital role in shaping suspense. Long, creeping tracking shots echo the pacing of the direction but are distinct in how they manipulate perspective. The camera often follows characters slowly through hallways or across rooms, making each step feel elongated, as if danger lurks just outside the frame. At times, the cinematographer chooses to let the camera glide behind the masked strangers, placing the audience uncomfortably close to the predators. These subjective movements make viewers complicit, aligning them with the stalkers even as they root for the victims. When violence erupts, the movements shift into handheld shakes and quick pans, simulating disorientation and chaos. The contrast between calm, methodical tracking and frenetic handheld sequences provides a visceral sense of control and loss of control, reflecting the character's experience. The color palette is another crucial storytelling tool. The Strangers Chapter 2 adopts a muted earthy palette dominated by browns, grays, and shadowy blues. This subdued approach enhances realism and grounds the film in a bleak, tangible world. Moments of bloodshed stand out sharply against this restrained backdrop, shocking the eye with splashes of red. The cinematography resists the temptation to stylize violence. Instead, it lets the stark contrast between muted tones and sudden color shifts speak for itself. The lack of bright or warm hues throughout the film strips away comfort, immersing viewers in a visual world that feels devoid of safety. Lighting design reinforces character psychology and thematic weight. Darkness dominates much of the film, but the cinematography employs it with intention rather than laziness. Pools of light carve out small zones of temporary safety, while deep shadows loom at the edges, reminding us that danger is never far away. Flashlights and car headlights become diegetic sources of illumination that double as narrative devices, narrowing vision and creating sudden reveals. When the protagonists attempt to navigate dark spaces, the beams of light catch glimpses of movement or reflections, delivering terror in fleeting doses. Harsh overhead lighting is used sparingly but effectively to expose characters at their most vulnerable, creating stark contrasts that strip away illusion and reveal raw fear. Certain standout shots elevate the film's visual identity. A particularly memorable composition shows one of the masked strangers standing motionless in the background of a wide shot, half concealed in shadow, while the protagonist remains oblivious in the foreground. The stillness of the figure combined with the framing creates an image that lingers in memory long after the scene has ended. Another striking sequence involves the camera slowly dollying away from a terrified character as she crouches in the corner of a dimly lit room, emphasizing her isolation and helplessness. These images are not just moments of horror but carefully crafted visual storytelling that distills the essence of the film into haunting tableaus. The cinematography also plays with perspective to heighten unease. Low angles make the masked strangers appear larger than life, reinforcing their dominance and anonymity. High angles diminish the protagonists, framing them as prey under the watchful gaze of unseen predators. By constantly shifting visual perspective, the cinematographer denies the audience a stable point of view, reflecting the unpredictability of the narrative itself. Ultimately, the cinematography in The Strangers Chapter 2 is not ornamental but deeply functional. Its framing dictates how we perceive vulnerability, its movements determine how we experience suspense, its color palette enforces bleak realism, and its lighting sharpens themes of exposure and concealment. Each shot is constructed to either suffocate or expose, to either withhold or reveal. These choices ensure that the film is not merely frightening in its content but haunting in its form. Long after the credits roll, what remains with the audience are not only the brutal acts of violence but the visual imprints of dread. Wide frames that echo emptiness, shadows that swallow safety, and faces caught in the harsh light of terror. The editing and pacing of The Strangers Chapter 2 serve as the backbone of its suspense. Horror films live and die by the rhythm of their cuts, the spaces between moments of quiet, and the bursts of chaos that interrupt them. Editing shapes how the audience perceives time, and in a story centered around stalking and survival, that control of time becomes just as important as the story itself. The Strangers Chapter 2 takes a deliberate approach, relying on carefully measured silences, restrained transitions, and sudden spikes of rapid cutting to keep viewers unsettled. The opening act demonstrates a steady, methodical rhythm. Early scenes are cut with patience, allowing characters to exist in their environment without constant interruption. Long takes are allowed to linger, and transitions between shots avoid rushing. This decision sets a tone of realism, as though the viewer is experiencing events in real time. It also creates a sense of anticipation because the audience expects horror to intrude at any moment. The editor understands that holding on an empty frame for just a second too long can create as much tension as a loud musical sting. As the story progresses into the inciting incident and rising action, the editing becomes more manipulative. Suspense sequences are often built through cross-cutting, alternating between the victims and the unseen stalkers. This technique creates dramatic irony, giving the audience knowledge of the lurking threat that the characters themselves lack. The timing of these cuts is crucial. Sometimes they arrive too early, amplifying dread by making the audience wait for the inevitable, and other times they arrive late, delivering shock through sudden reveals. This interplay between withholding and revealing information is one of the editing's strongest contributions to the film's tension. Flashbacks are used sparingly, which keeps the narrative grounded in the immediacy of the terror. When they do appear, they are edited with a softer rhythm, employing slower dissolves or fades to distinguish memory from present time. These moments provide context without derailing the suspense, and the editorial choice to minimize them helps avoid confusion. Instead of disrupting the timeline, the editing trusts the audience to follow events linearly, reserving stylistic flourishes for moments of heightened fear. The pacing in the second act tightens significantly. Where the first act favored longer takes and restrained transitions, the middle sections use quicker cuts to simulate urgency. Sequences of characters running, hiding, or searching are often edited into short bursts, with each shot lasting only a few seconds. This accelerates the audience's heartbeat and mirrors the character's adrenaline. Yet the editor is careful not to overindulge in rapid-fire cutting. Silence and stillness remain essential tools, and often a chase sequence will conclude with an extended pause in a darkened room. These moments of restraint prevent fatigue and remind the audience that horror is not about constant movement but about contrast between calm and chaos. A standout editorial choice occurs in scenes where the masked strangers enter the frame without warning. Instead of cutting to their arrival, the editor often reveals them within an existing shot, allowing the viewer to notice them naturally in the background. This technique relies on spatial continuity and subtle timing rather than abrupt cutting, and it proves far more unsettling. It demonstrates an understanding that sometimes the scariest moments come not from editing that forces attention, but from editing that holds back and lets the audience discover the terror for themselves. The climax of the film is where the editing takes its most aggressive form. Cuts become shorter, transitions sharper, and the rhythm erratic. The deliberate balance of the first two acts gives way to a frantic energy that mirrors the character's desperation. Cross-cutting reaches its peak here, often jumping between multiple characters' perspectives in quick succession. While this creates intensity, it occasionally risks disorientation. In some moments, the sheer speed of the cuts obscures spatial clarity, making it difficult to track where characters are in relation to one another. While this may frustrate some viewers, others may interpret it as an intentional reflection of the chaos of survival. Despite occasional confusion, the finale still benefits from carefully timed pauses. The editor allows moments of silence, where the frame lingers on a trembling protagonist or an empty hallway, to reset the rhythm before plunging back into the chaos. These fluctuations prevent the climax from becoming monotonous and ensure that each burst of action lands with renewed impact. Overall, the editing of The Strangers Chapter 2 demonstrates a strong understanding of horror mechanics. It balances restraint with urgency, silence with noise, and long takes with abrupt cuts. The pacing across acts is carefully considered. Slow in the beginning to build unease, tighter in the middle to sustain tension, and chaotic in the finale to simulate the breakdown of control. While there are instances where the editing risks being too abrupt or disorienting, these moments are outweighed by the precision of its suspense-building techniques. What makes the editing memorable is not just its function in delivering scares but its ability to shape emotion. A character's fear is not simply shown through performance but amplified through how long the camera lingers on their expression, when the cut arrives, and what the audience is allowed to see. By trusting silence as much as action, by choosing when to reveal and when to withhold, the editing ensures that the terror of The Strangers Chapter 2 resonates beyond jump scares. It becomes a rhythm of dread, a manipulation of time that keeps the audience locked in fear until the very last frame. The soundtrack and score of The Strangers Chapter 2 function as an invisible hand shaping the audience's emotions, guiding them through fear, tension, and brief respites of calm. In horror, sound is never merely background. It is an active force that manipulates perception, sharpens dread, and sometimes offers deceptive comfort before tearing it away. The Strangers Chapter 2 understands this dynamic and uses music, silence, and sonic texture to great effect, creating an auditory landscape that lingers as strongly as any visual image. The score leans heavily on minimalist motifs that repeat throughout the film. A recurring low-frequency hum or drone appears during scenes of stalking, almost imperceptible at first but steadily growing as the threat draws closer. This motif attaches itself to the masked strangers, functioning almost like their presence in sound form. Whenever it emerges, the audience instinctively knows that danger is near, even before the camera confirms it. By establishing this auditory cue early and repeating it throughout, the film gives viewers an unconscious association between sound and menace, ensuring that fear builds before anything even happens. Equally effective is the use of silence. At several critical points, the soundtrack drops away entirely, leaving only ambient noise, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of leaves outside, or the shallow breaths of a terrified character. These stretches of silence are some of the most unnerving sequences in the film because they deny the audience the comfort of musical guidance. Without score to signal when the scare will strike, viewers are left stranded in uncertainty, forced to confront raw sounds of environment and human fear. The editor and composer work together here to weaponize silence as much as music. Licensed music plays a more limited role, but when it is used, it creates sharp contrasts that heighten unease. A cheerful oldies track playing faintly from a radio, for example, becomes grotesque when paired with the image of masked intruders lurking in the shadows. The mismatch between tone and context creates irony that unsettles the viewer. Rather than relying on pop needle drops for cheap effect, the film employs them sparingly, allowing their intrusion to feel jarring and deliberate. This selective use prevents the soundtrack from distracting and instead deepens the film's theme of violence disrupting the mundane. One of the standout musical decisions involves the use of sustained strings layered with subtle electronic distortion. This hybrid approach bridges classic horror scoring with modern sound design, making the score feel timeless yet contemporary. The strings provide an emotional texture, evoking dread and sorrow, while the electronic elements add unpredictability and unease. During chase sequences, the score often escalates into staccato bursts, mirroring the character's frantic energy. The editing works hand in hand with this rhythm, cutting faster as the music quickens, until both sound and image reach a breaking point. There are also moments where the score risks overplaying its hand. In certain scenes, particularly in the middle act, the music swells too predictably, telegraphing the arrival of a scare rather than letting it emerge organically. These cues can dilute the raw unpredictability that silence or subtler motifs achieve. However, Such moments are relatively rare and do not overshadow the film's overall mastery of sonic restraint. For the most part, the score knows when to step back and when to lean forward, balancing subtlety with shock. What elevates the film's soundscape is how it ties music to character states. When Madeleine Petsch's protagonist experiences moments of quiet determination, the score shifts from oppressive drones to softer, melancholic notes, reflecting her resilience amid terror. Conversely, during scenes of total despair, the sound collapses into dissonant layers that overwhelm the ear, echoing her mental and emotional collapse. This musical mirroring deepens empathy, allowing the audience not just to watch but to feel her experience through auditory cues. The climactic sequences showcase the soundtrack and score at their most powerful. As the final confrontation builds, the music alternates between silence and surging crescendos, each pause ratcheting tension higher before unleashing bursts of sound that collide with on-screen violence. A particularly memorable moment involves the score dropping completely silent just as a door creaks open, holding the audience in unbearable suspense before exploding into a sudden, chaotic burst of strings and percussion. These carefully calculated shifts turn the finale into not just a visual spectacle but an auditory assault. After the chaos subsides, the closing moments return to minimalism, with the score retreating into a somber motif that underscores the bleakness of survival. Rather than offering triumphant resolution, the final notes leave the audience with lingering unease. This decision ensures that the fear does not dissipate when the credits roll but follows viewers out of the theater, carried by the memory of sound. In the end, the soundtrack and score of The Strangers Chapter 2 elevate the film far beyond its narrative beats. They act as an unseen character, shaping atmosphere, guiding emotion, and embedding cues that attach themselves to fear itself. Recurring motifs signal danger, silences weaponize uncertainty, and carefully chosen bursts of licensed music disturb the sense of normalcy. While a few cues may occasionally signal their intentions too loudly, the overall sound design demonstrates an acute understanding of horror's greatest tool, the manipulation of what we hear and what we do not. Through its soundtrack and score, the film ensures that terror is not only seen but deeply felt, echoing in the audience's ears long after the final image fades. Beneath the surface-level terror and violence of The Strangers Chapter 2 lies a film deeply engaged with questions about vulnerability, randomness, survival, and the unsettling absence of control. Horror films often thrive when they connect scares to broader ideas, and this sequel continues the franchise tradition of wrestling with themes that go beyond masked killers and home invasions. What makes the movie resonate is not only the brutality of its events but the way those events echo larger anxieties about human existence, identity, and the fragility of safety in a world where violence can erupt without reason. One of the most central themes of The Strangers Chapter 2 is randomness. Unlike traditional horror villains motivated by revenge, trauma, or supernatural purpose, the masked strangers embody senseless violence. Their attacks are not targeted at people with personal connections but at random individuals who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. This randomness is chilling because it denies the audience the comfort of explanation. It forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that violence can strike without warning, logic, or justification. The film makes this idea clear through its images more than its dialogue. Shots of the strangers watching silently, choosing their victims without reason, underline that this is not about who the characters are but simply that they exist and are vulnerable. Closely linked to randomness is the theme of vulnerability. The protagonists are ordinary people, not action heroes or detectives trained to fight back. They are everyday individuals confronted with extraordinary terror, and the cinematography and direction emphasize their smallness in wide frames and their desperation in close-ups. Vulnerability here is not only physical but psychological. As the story unfolds, the film explores how fear breaks down normal behavior, reducing people to survival instincts. The strangers exploit this fragility, playing with their victims before attacking, demonstrating the imbalance of power between predator and prey. Power is another key theme threaded throughout the narrative. The masked strangers represent an unyielding, faceless force of dominance. Their anonymity strips away humanity and replaces it with a pure symbol of control. By refusing to show their faces or explain their motives, the film makes them less like individuals and more like embodiments of fear itself. Their power lies in unpredictability and patience, while the protagonist's struggle is defined by their inability to reclaim control over their environment. Scenes where characters attempt to hide or fight back often end with the strangers effortlessly regaining dominance, reinforcing the imbalance of power as central to the horror. The film also touches on identity, particularly through the masks of the strangers. Masks erase individuality, turning people into symbols. For the victims, this makes their attackers unknowable and terrifying. The masks are not simply disguises but statements that identity does not matter, neither the victims nor the killers. The randomness of the violence combined with the erasure of identity creates an existential horror, the idea that who we are is meaningless in the face of senseless brutality. The strangers do not care about names, stories, or histories. They care only about the act of terror. Another thematic layer is the collapse of safety. Homes, cabins, or towns typically represent secure environments, but in The Strangers Chapter 2, these spaces become traps. The film emphasizes that security is an illusion. Locks, doors, and walls fail to keep danger out, and familiar places become hostile landscapes. This thematic echo resonates strongly with audiences who recognize the fragility of safety in their own lives. It is a reminder that horror often emerges not from the extraordinary but from the ordinary environments we assume will protect us. The movie also wrestles with the theme of endurance. While the protagonists are victimized, the film subtly explores how human beings resist despair even in impossible circumstances. Scenes of characters comforting each other, strategizing, or refusing to give up highlight resilience as a counterpoint to fear. This resilience is not always rewarded, but its presence provides emotional weight to the story. The audience recognizes that survival is not just about physical escape, but about mental strength in the face of hopelessness. At times, the film offers mixed signals in its thematic exploration. While randomness is a powerful theme, some sequences risk undermining it by hinting at deeper motives or deliberate cruelty beyond pure chance. This ambiguity can frustrate viewers seeking consistency, but it also opens space for interpretation. Are the strangers purely agents of chaos, or do they represent something larger, such as the inevitability of violence in human society? The lack of clarity may unsettle, but it ensures that the film remains open to multiple readings. Perhaps the most haunting message of The Strangers Chapter 2 is its insistence that evil does not always come with explanation or resolution. In many horror films, villains are defeated, or their motives revealed, giving closure to the audience. Here, closure is denied. The randomness of violence remains unanswered, and the fragility of safety remains exposed. The film communicates these messages primarily through imagery rather than dialogue. Silent figures emerging from the shadows, a mask staring blankly at a terrified victim, or a house once filled with life now drenched in silence. In conclusion, The Strangers Chapter 2 is not simply about masked killers hunting victims. Beneath its surface lies a meditation on randomness, vulnerability, power, identity, and the collapse of safety. The consistency of these themes, reinforced by both action and image, makes the film unsettling long after the final frame. Even when the film provides mixed signals, the ambiguity only deepens its impact, inviting audiences to wrestle with the frightening idea that violence is often senseless, safety is an illusion, and survival is fragile. These themes are what transform the movie from a simple horror story into a chilling reflection on human fear and the unpredictability of life itself. The Strangers Chapter 2 is primarily rooted in the horror tradition of realism, where atmosphere, tension, and practical craft often outweigh the need for heavy digital spectacle. Unlike action blockbusters or science fiction epics, this film does not rely on massive computer-generated sequences to drive its story. Instead, it uses a restrained mix of practical effects, subtle CGI, and visual trickery to enhance the realism of its setting while keeping the audience grounded in the terror of ordinary spaces turned unsafe. Still, the digital elements present in the movie deserve close attention, both for the moments where they elevate tension and for the rare instances where they might risk distracting from the film's grounded tone. One of the most effective uses of visual effects in The Strangers Chapter 2 is in its manipulation of lighting and shadows. Horror thrives on what is hidden just outside the frame, and digital tools are used sparingly but effectively to deepen darkness, elongate shadows, or enhance silhouettes in ways that practical lighting alone cannot always achieve. In several sequences where the masked strangers emerge from the background, VFX work helps conceal their movements until the precise moment of reveal. This blending of practical blocking and subtle digital touch-ups ensures that the audience feels both surprise and unease without ever questioning the authenticity of what they are watching. Another area where digital effects support storytelling is in environmental design. While much of the film takes place in seemingly mundane spaces like houses, cabins, and outdoor locations, small VFX additions amplify the atmosphere. Enhancements to fog, smoke, and weather effects create a heightened sense of danger and isolation. For example, a late-night sequence in a wooded area uses CGI to thicken mist and obscure visibility, giving the scene a dreamlike quality that disorients the viewer alongside the characters. These effects never dominate the frame but instead serve to reinforce the psychological tension at the heart of the story. Practical gore and violence are central to the horror genre, and The Strangers Chapter 2 maintains this tradition with a reliance on makeup, prosthetics, and physical stunts. However, CGI plays a role in smoothing out transitions or adding subtle layers of detail. Blood splatter, wounds, and impact effects are often enhanced digitally to appear more convincing without drawing attention to the technology itself. The result is a hybrid approach where practical craftsmanship grounds the violence while digital artistry polishes it to a level of heightened realism. Importantly, the film avoids the overuse of exaggerated CGI blood, which can often break immersion in horror movies, instead aiming for subtlety and restraint. There are sequences that required more noticeable compositing, particularly during chase scenes or moments involving dangerous stunts. For example, a scene where a vehicle crashes into an obstacle blends practical stunt driving with CGI debris and environmental damage. The compositing work here ensures safety for the performers while maintaining intensity for the audience. Similarly, shots involving windows shattering or doors breaking incorporate digital elements to enhance the scale of destruction without requiring unsafe levels of practical force. These effects are convincing because they are carefully integrated, never dominating the screen but always serving the needs of the story. It is worth noting that in horror, silence and stillness are often more terrifying than spectacle. The Strangers Chapter 2 understands this well, and its limited use of digital spectacle reflects its commitment to mood over flash. When CGI does appear, it rarely calls attention to itself. This is a film that values subtlety, and the visual effects are designed to be invisible rather than showy. For instance, background plate adjustments, continuity fixes, or subtle digital cleanups are used to maintain visual consistency across scenes. These adjustments may go unnoticed by most viewers, which is a sign of their success. That said, there are a few moments where CGI risks pulling the viewer out of the experience. A handful of sequences with enhanced flames or artificially extended smoke appear slightly less organic compared to the surrounding practical work. While these effects are not distracting enough to break the film's tension, keen-eyed viewers may notice the difference between digital and physical elements. In horror, where immersion is everything, even small inconsistencies can momentarily dilute fear. Fortunately, these instances are rare and do not dominate the film's overall aesthetic. One of the most technically impressive uses of visual effects is in the film's handling of perspective shots. The strangers are often shown lurking at the edges of the frame, and digital manipulation is sometimes employed to adjust depth of field or enhance the subtle presence of a masked figure in the background. This creates the unnerving sensation that danger is always nearby, even when the characters believe they are safe. It is a clever marriage of cinematography and VFX that strengthens the thematic core of vulnerability and paranoia. In comparing digital and practical approaches, The Strangers Chapter 2 clearly prioritizes practicality whenever possible. The tangible feel of real makeup, real sets, and real stunts is crucial for grounding the film in a world that feels authentic. CGI complements these efforts by filling in gaps, enhancing atmosphere, and ensuring safety, but it never overtakes the tactile realism that defines the franchise. This balance between physical and digital craft is one of the film's strengths, ensuring that audiences remain immersed in its terrifying world. In conclusion, The Strangers Chapter 2 demonstrates that visual effects and CGI do not need to dominate a film to leave a lasting impact. Instead, they can be used sparingly and intelligently to reinforce realism, intensify atmosphere, and polish practical effects. The best moments of digital work in this film are invisible, seamlessly integrated into the story so that viewers feel fear rather than notice technology. While there are occasional moments where CGI is more visible than intended, the overall effect supports storytelling without distraction. This careful balance of restraint and technical precision ensures that the visual effects enhance rather than overshadow the film's core identity as a grounded, suspense-driven horror experience. The Strangers Chapter 2 relies heavily on its production design and location choices to build the unsettling world where its story unfolds. Horror thrives on atmosphere, and in this film, the sets and landscapes do much of the heavy lifting in creating an environment where audiences feel the dread of isolation, intrusion, and vulnerability. Every choice, from the furniture in a room to the layout of a house, from the textures of the walls to the broader location of events, works to immerse viewers in a world that feels ordinary yet increasingly threatening. At the center of the film's set design are domestic spaces that should feel safe but instead become claustrophobic traps. The production team uses real houses rather than soundstage mock-ups for many of the key interiors. This decision adds authenticity because real locations have quirks, narrow hallways, awkwardly placed doors, uneven floor levels, that cannot be perfectly replicated on a soundstage. These imperfections heighten the unpredictability of movement during tense moments. For example, when characters move through tight corridors, the angles and cramped dimensions intensify the sense of being stalked. A studio-built set might have allowed for more controlled camera placement, but the real-world constraints make the environment feel lived in and threatening. Attention to detail in set dressing further supports the realism. Ordinary household items are carefully placed to suggest history and character without drawing overt attention. Family photos, worn furniture, mismatched decorations, and slightly cluttered kitchen counters all create the sense of a home with personal identity. These details make the intrusion of masked strangers all the more terrifying because it is not happening in a generic horror setting but in a believable space that could belong to any family. Production design here becomes an invisible character, reminding audiences that horror can invade the most familiar environments. The use of color palettes in set design also plays a key role. Interiors lean toward muted, natural tones, wooden textures, beige walls, and low lighting that make the sudden presence of figures in dark clothing more striking. This design strategy creates contrast, allowing the masked strangers to stand out visually while simultaneously blending into shadows when needed. Lighting interacts with the set elements in ways that reinforce dread. A lamp on a side table, a dim hallway light, or a flickering bulb in a garage can change the tone of a space from comforting to menacing. Beyond interiors, the film's exterior locations are equally important. The production team favors isolated settings, particularly rural homes and wooded areas. Wide shots of empty landscapes communicate loneliness and vulnerability, reinforcing the sense that help is far away. The remoteness of these locations also underscores the timeless horror theme that danger can strike in the most secluded places. The use of forests, open fields, and empty roads grounds the film in realism while heightening the feeling of exposure, as if the characters are trapped in a vast space with nowhere to hide. One standout aspect of production design is how spaces evolve as the narrative progresses. At first, homes and outdoor areas feel ordinary and somewhat safe. But as the story unfolds, damage accumulates. Doors are broken, windows are shattered, objects are displaced. The set design reflects this progression of chaos, visually marking the characters' descent into fear. By the end, familiar spaces look transformed, no longer recognizable as safe havens but as remnants of a violent struggle. The film also makes smart choices in balancing real-world locations with controlled studio environments. While exteriors and many interiors were filmed on location, some key sequences requiring extensive stunt work or heavy control of lighting were recreated on soundstages. These builds allowed the director to manipulate elements like breakaway walls, reinforced floors, and adjustable ceilings for camera placement. The art department ensured these constructed sets matched the textures and imperfections of real locations, maintaining continuity in visual style. Props also play an understated but crucial role. Everyday items become tools of survival or symbols of dread. A kitchen knife, a flashlight, or even a set of car keys are designed and placed with narrative intention. Their availability, or lack thereof, dictates character decisions in moments of panic. The realism of these props, worn and used rather than shiny and new, reinforces the believability of the world. In horror, audiences are often distracted when props look too staged or artificial, but The Strangers Chapter 2 avoids this pitfall with careful attention to authenticity. Another element worth noting is how the sets influence performance. Actors interact with spaces that feel real, and this authenticity supports more grounded reactions. A creaking staircase, a stiff door handle, or the echo of footsteps in a hallway provides natural stimuli that heighten performances. The design of these locations encourages actors to engage with their environment in ways that scripted stage directions alone could not achieve. Thematic resonance also emerges through production design. The idea that safety is an illusion is reinforced by the transformation of comfortable domestic spaces into arenas of terror. A cozy living room becomes a cage. A quiet street turns into a hunting ground. Even open fields, typically associated with freedom, are recontextualized as spaces of helpless exposure. The production design constantly reminds viewers that no place is safe once the strangers arrive. In conclusion, The set design and location choices in The Strangers Chapter 2 are integral to its effectiveness as a horror film. By favoring real homes and authentic spaces, by dressing sets with meaningful detail, and by using both interiors and exteriors to reinforce themes of isolation and invasion, the film grounds its terror in a world that feels painfully believable. The balance of realism and controlled design ensures that audiences not only watch the horror unfold, but feel as if it could happen in their own neighborhoods. Production design here is not background decoration. It is a vital storytelling tool that amplifies fear, supports character interaction, and leaves viewers unsettled long after the credits roll. The Strangers Chapter 2 is built on atmosphere and tension, and its script reflects that same philosophy. Dialogue is not overused here, which is a strength in the horror genre. Too often, horror films rely on characters explaining what is happening or voicing their fear in ways that feel artificial. Instead, this film trusts silence, pacing, and subtext to carry much of the weight. The writing leans toward naturalistic conversations, moments of hesitation, and understated exchanges that ring true for people caught in terrifying situations. This restraint keeps the film grounded and believable, while also leaving room for interpretation. The dialogue shines when it is used to reveal character dynamics without spelling them out directly. For example, early exchanges between the central characters give us insight into their relationships through tone, pacing, and word choice rather than heavy exposition. A couple arguing over something seemingly small hints at larger tensions, and the way they cut each other off or avoid certain phrases tells us more than a blunt explanation ever could. This layered approach allows audiences to pick up on emotional undercurrents, making the characters feel more human and relatable before the chaos begins. Another strength of the script lies in how dialogue functions as a plot engine. Horror films often stumble when characters unrealistically describe the danger they are in, but here, lines are written to serve dual purposes. A conversation about finding car keys or debating whether to hide or run carries both immediate survival stakes and emotional weight. These exchanges move the story forward while also deepening our understanding of how each character responds under pressure. The tension between what is said and what remains unspoken becomes a driving force in several key scenes. Subtext is one of the film's most effective tools. A line as simple as, "Did you lock the door?" can carry multiple meanings depending on the moment. In one context, it might feel like a casual precaution. Later in the film, the same line becomes loaded with dread, signaling fear of intrusion and loss of control. This layering of meaning demonstrates that the script is carefully designed to let ordinary dialogue take on extraordinary weight. Silence is also used strategically. Long pauses, unfinished sentences, and wordless reactions often speak louder than dialogue, capturing the paralysis and shock of being hunted. The masked strangers themselves are defined more by their silence than by words. Their lack of dialogue is a deliberate choice that adds to their menace. When they do make noise, whether through small taunts, heavy breathing, or a sudden phrase, the impact is magnified precisely because it is so rare. This script decision underscores the asymmetry between the attackers and their victims. One side defined by normal human speech, the other defined by absence and restraint. That imbalance makes encounters all the more terrifying. That said, the script is not flawless. There are moments where dialogue feels a little too on the nose, especially when characters vocalize fears that are already visually clear. For instance, having a character say, "They're inside the house," after the audience has already seen evidence of this risks redundancy. These lines do not ruin the tension, but they feel unnecessary and could have been trimmed for sharper pacing. A rewrite in those places might have tightened emotional clarity and allowed visuals to carry the moment without verbal reinforcement. The script occasionally inserts conversational padding that slows momentum. Small talk in early scenes is useful for grounding the characters, but at times, it drifts into filler that does not deepen character or theme. In a horror film where every word should feel loaded with potential meaning, these lighter exchanges stand out as less purposeful. While they may have been intended to create contrast before the terror begins, a slightly leaner script might have kept the tension simmering even in quiet moments. There are, however, standout lines that linger long after the film ends. Some are chilling because of their simplicity, like a whispered plea for help or a desperate demand to be left alone. Others resonate thematically, reminding audiences that the film is not just about physical survival but about psychological endurance. These lines echo in the mind because they are short, sharp, and perfectly timed within the narrative. They are not overwritten but instead distilled to their most powerful essence. The script also makes smart use of repetition. Certain phrases or questions return at different points in the story, each time with altered significance. What begins as casual or routine becomes ominous and haunting by the end. This repetition strengthens thematic cohesion and gives the film a lingering echo of inevitability, as if characters are trapped not just by the strangers but by their own recurring fears. Overall, the dialogue and script of The Strangers Chapter 2 succeed in balancing realism with thematic depth. The words spoken feel like those of ordinary people facing extraordinary horror, and the silences between them feel just as intentional and important. While occasional on-the-nose lines or padded conversations could have been trimmed, the script's voice remains clear and effective. Its best moments are those where subtext, repetition, and silence work together to turn simple lines into chilling emotional peaks. By trusting its characters, its actors, and its audience, the script avoids over-explaining and instead creates space for fear to grow in the gaps between words. In the end, the writing does not just move the story forward, it helps define its identity. The Strangers Chapter 2 is a film where dialogue is as much about what is left unsaid as what is spoken aloud. That choice makes the script an essential part of the film's tension, ensuring that words and silences alike carry lasting impact. The Strangers Chapter 2 is firmly rooted in the horror genre, yet it demonstrates a careful balance between honoring the expectations of traditional horror and experimenting with choices that make it stand apart. At its core, the film follows the home invasion formula that defined the original movie, but this time the execution leans into a broader spectrum of genre conventions that blend suspense, psychological drama, and moments of thriller intensity. The result is a film that feels familiar enough to satisfy horror fans while also adding new textures that keep the experience fresh. Horror audiences expect tension, atmosphere, and dread, and The Strangers Chapter 2 delivers on all three. The film avoids overloading itself with action-heavy sequences or supernatural gimmicks, sticking instead to the primal fear of being hunted in your own space. This is one of the clearest signs that it honors its genre roots. It does not attempt to reinvent horror through unnecessary spectacle, but focuses on intimacy and isolation. Long stretches of silence, the sudden knock on the door, or the sound of footsteps in the background create the kind of atmosphere fans of the original film crave. One of the classic horror beats the film nails is the slow build of suspense. Rather than jumping straight into chaos, the movie spends time setting up the environment and characters. Audiences are given time to breathe before the dread begins to seep in. This pacing mirrors the original The Strangers and aligns with the tradition of horror films that thrive on gradual escalation. The presence of the masked intruders is felt long before it is fully seen, allowing anticipation to drive the fear rather than relying solely on shock. At the same time, The Strangers Chapter 2 avoids some common clichés that often weaken modern horror. There is little reliance on cheap jump scares, which can feel manipulative and predictable. Instead, the film favors sustained tension, where the audience is kept on edge for extended moments without release. This strategy not only honors the slow burn style of the original, but also appeals to viewers who prefer psychological horror over gimmicks. Another avoided cliché is the over-explained backstory of the villains. Many horror sequels fall into the trap of over-explaining their antagonists, but this film preserves mystery. By withholding too much detail, the strangers remain terrifying as forces of randomness and chaos rather than overly humanized characters. The film does, however, play with hybrid elements. While it is predominantly horror, The Strangers Chapter 2 borrows beats from thriller and drama genres. The thriller influence shows in its chase sequences, where momentum and physical danger heighten tension beyond psychological dread. The drama elements come through in character relationships, where arguments, reconciliations, and personal conflicts provide grounding stakes. These hybrid touches do not pull the film out of its horror identity but instead make it more layered, offering multiple entry points for different types of audiences. Comparisons to other genre films highlight how the execution both aligns with and diverges from tradition. Unlike slashers such as Halloween or Friday the 13th, The Strangers Chapter 2 does not glorify violence or present its killers as charismatic figures. Instead, it leans closer to the minimalist terror of films like Funny Games or Hush, where tension comes from the banality of evil. For fans of psychological horror, this grounded realism is a refreshing contrast to supernatural or gore-driven franchises. At the same time, fans expecting more overt spectacle may feel the film is too restrained. One of the boldest risks the movie takes is its reliance on ambiguity. While some audiences find this unsettling and effective, others may interpret it as underdeveloped storytelling. By not tying every thread neatly, the film leaves room for interpretation, which can either delight genre purists who appreciate subtlety or frustrate viewers looking for clear answers. This risk-taking shows that the filmmakers prioritize atmosphere and mood over conventional resolutions. Another point worth noting is how the film executes its climax. Genre tradition often dictates a bloody, explosive finale where either the villains are defeated or the final survivor makes a narrow escape. The Strangers Chapter 2 plays with this expectation by offering a conclusion that is more unsettling than satisfying. Instead of providing a sense of closure, it lingers on dread, emphasizing survival as temporary rather than final. This choice both honors the nihilistic tone of the original and pushes against the more formulaic resolutions of mainstream horror. For USA audiences, especially those who have followed the franchise, the execution lands in a middle ground. It does not reinvent horror, but it respects the genre by committing to tension, realism, and unease. It refreshes expectations by avoiding cheap scares, leaning into silence, and blending elements of thriller and drama. Yet it risks alienating viewers who prefer more action-heavy, gore-driven, or neatly resolved endings. In conclusion, The Strangers Chapter 2 succeeds in delivering a horror experience that is faithful to genre traditions while introducing enough variation to stand apart from clichés. It nails the classic beats of suspense, atmosphere, and intrusion while avoiding the traps of over-explained villains or jump-scare reliance. By borrowing from thriller pacing and dramatic character work, it enriches the horror foundation with added emotional weight. Though some risks may divide audiences, the film ultimately honors what horror fans want most: an experience that makes the ordinary terrifying and leaves them unsettled long after the credits roll. Its genre execution is not about radical reinvention but about refining the fundamentals, and in that respect, it earns its place as a worthy continuation of the franchise. The Strangers, Chapter 2 presents itself on the surface as a suspenseful horror thriller, but beneath the unsettling violence and nightmarish encounters lies a range of social and cultural commentary. The film does more than scare, it reflects certain anxieties about society, personal safety, and the fragility of community. At its core, the movie is not only about masked killers terrorizing unsuspecting victims but also about what those killers represent in a larger cultural sense. Their faceless anonymity and random cruelty tap into deep fears about the unpredictability of violence in modern life, where danger can emerge suddenly and without reason. This randomness mirrors real-life concerns about home invasions, mass violence, and the sense that no one is truly safe, regardless of where they live. One of the most striking elements of the film is its commentary on isolation. The victims are often portrayed as detached from strong community ties, living in spaces that appear private but ultimately leave them vulnerable. In The Strangers, Chapter 2, the suburban and rural settings underscore a sense of false security. These places are usually associated with peace, safety, and comfort, yet here they become the backdrop for unimaginable terror. The film seems to critique the illusion that physical environment or wealth automatically guarantees protection. In this way, it resonates with USA audiences who have seen an increase in conversations about suburban crime and the realization that vulnerability is not confined to urban settings. The killers themselves, masked and almost emotionless, become symbols of dehumanization. They are not given backstories or reasons that fully explain their actions, which reflects society's struggle to understand senseless acts of violence. Their masks erase individuality, turning them into avatars of pure menace. This anonymity could be interpreted as commentary on how people in modern culture sometimes hide behind digital screens, facades, or even societal systems to commit harm without accountability. While the comparison may not be overt, the audience is left to wrestle with the notion of how individuals detach from empathy and act without remorse, a theme that feels increasingly relevant in a world where violence can feel both impersonal and relentless. Another layer of cultural commentary comes through the victims' relationships. The film highlights interpersonal struggles, fragile trust, and how fear brings out hidden tensions. These strained dynamics may reflect broader cultural concerns about disconnection within families and friendships, where stress fractures are exposed in moments of crisis. The attackers exploit silence, distance, and the inability of the victims to fully unite against the threat, almost as if the killers are a metaphor for the internal divisions that weaken modern communities. For a USA audience, where discussions about polarization and social fragmentation are common, these dynamics hold an unsettling mirror. The Strangers, Chapter 2 also touches on themes of gender and vulnerability. The way male and female victims react to danger and how the killers interact with them raises questions about cultural stereotypes and power dynamics. Female characters are often shown enduring prolonged psychological terror, while male characters sometimes struggle with feelings of helplessness when they cannot protect loved ones. This reversal and reinforcement of expectations invite debate. Is the film critiquing gendered ideas of strength and vulnerability, or is it falling into tropes that exploit suffering for shock value? How viewers interpret these dynamic shapes whether they see the movie as socially thoughtful or simply brutal. Another cultural layer is the depiction of fear itself. The movie shows how fear can strip away rational thought and reduce individuals to raw survival instincts. In a broader sense, this can be linked to the cultural climate of the USA, where fear, whether from crime, politics, or global crises, often drives behavior more strongly than reasoned dialogue. The Strangers, Chapter 2 magnifies this fear, showing how quickly the veneer of normal life crumbles under pressure. The social commentary here is less about prescribing solutions and more about holding a mirror to the ways people unravel when control slips away. At times, the film risks oversimplifying complex issues. Its portrayal of violence as motiveless terror avoids deeper explanations, which can frustrate audiences looking for more substance. While this randomness amplifies horror, it sidesteps the opportunity to probe the cultural systems that foster violence, such as poverty, social alienation, or cycles of abuse. This lack of exploration could be viewed as tone-deaf, especially in a cultural landscape where people are demanding more thoughtful engagement with the root causes of real-world violence. Ultimately, the social and cultural commentary in The Strangers, Chapter 2 works by unsettling audiences with more than gore or jump scares. It forces viewers to confront the reality that safety is often an illusion, that violence can be random, and that communities weakened by isolation or division are more vulnerable than they realize. For USA audiences, who are constantly navigating discussions about safety, identity, and societal trust, the film resonates as both a horror story and a cultural reflection. Even when the movie simplifies, it raises questions that linger, ensuring that its impact extends beyond the theater. Audience engagement is one of the most important measures of a horror film's success, and The Strangers, Chapter 2 understands this well. It is not just about scaring audiences in the moment, but about leaving them with images, moments, and questions that linger long after the credits roll. The movie has been designed to provoke a range of emotional reactions, from gasps of terror to quiet unease to spirited debates about motivation and meaning. These reactions help ensure that the film lives on in conversations, social media posts, and repeated viewings. The scenes that make viewers gasp are the ones that play with silence and sudden violence. One of the most effective tactics in this sequel is its use of space. Long stretches of quiet hallway shots, slow pans across darkened rooms, and glimpses of shadows in the background set up moments of sharp surprise. When the killers strike, it is often after lulling the audience into a false sense of calm. Viewers may jump at these sudden bursts, but the tension that builds beforehand is what keeps them locked in their seats. For USA audiences used to horror conventions, these setups feel familiar yet fresh enough to hold attention, and the lack of predictable timing in some sequences ensures that the gasps are genuine. Moments that draw emotional reactions go beyond fear. The film also creates space for empathy and sadness. Victims are not just anonymous figures. The script spends time developing their relationships, giving weight to their fear and pain. When a character breaks down in desperation, or when a bond is tested under the pressure of survival, audiences may feel a sting of grief. In particular, the way certain deaths are framed to highlight the emotional toll on survivors adds a tragic weight that resonates strongly. These are not disposable characters, and that difference elevates the audience's emotional investment. Another form of engagement comes from shock paired with recognition. There are signature moments built for repeat viewing, like the now familiar image of masked figures silently watching from the dark. These visual motifs act as calling cards for the franchise, moments that audiences anticipate and later share as gifs or stills. Fans will likely return to these moments because they embody the essence of the Strangers brand. Horror that is terrifying not because it is loud or over the top, but because it is quiet, patient, and deeply unsettling. Debate also plays a central role in how audiences engage with this sequel. Much of the film's power lies in what it does not explain. The lack of clear motives for the killers fuels endless conversation. Are they symbols of chaos? Are they driven by some unspoken ideology? Or are they simply pure evil? This ambiguity guarantees that viewers will leave the theater discussing interpretations, and in the age of social media, that ambiguity sparks threads, debates, and fan theories. Horror audiences often thrive on mystery, and The Strangers, Chapter 2 feeds that appetite. The movie also rewards attention to detail, which enhances its rewatchability. Sharp-eyed viewers may notice subtle clues in the set design, background movements, or recurring sound motifs. These details are easy to miss during a first viewing when fear dominates the experience, but on subsequent watches they deepen appreciation. For example, the placement of certain props or the way shadows move in the background can foreshadow later events. Viewers who enjoy dissecting horror films scene by scene will find plenty to uncover. Not all moments are terrifying, though. In some instances, there is dark humor in the way characters react to absurdly frightening situations. These moments are not played for laughs in a traditional sense, but rather release the tension just enough to keep audiences from becoming numb to the horror. A nervous chuckle here and there is part of the engagement, reminding viewers of their own vulnerability. The push and pull between fear and relief makes the movie more dynamic and gives audiences a variety of emotional touchpoints. Certain scenes are designed for cultural sharing. The iconic imagery of masked strangers appearing silently behind unsuspecting characters or lingering in a room is tailor-made for social media circulation. Horror fans in the USA, who often trade GIFs and clips to celebrate the genre, will find these moments perfect for online discussions and fan-made edits. These visual beats cement the movie's cultural presence beyond the theater. Finally, the most significant audience engagement comes from how the film forces viewers to project themselves into the story. The randomness of the attacks leaves audiences asking, "What would I do in that situation?" This form of personal reflection is one of the reasons the franchise has endured. The killers could appear anywhere, target anyone, and strike without reason. That premise terrifies because it is universal. By encouraging this kind of internal debate, the film ensures it will be talked about long after the credits roll. In the end, The Strangers, Chapter 2 balances gasps, tears, and thoughtful silence. It provides signature moments that fans will revisit, fosters debates about meaning and motivation, and delivers iconic imagery that is likely to be shared across platforms. Its rewatchability is built into its layered design, rewarding audiences who look closer on a second or third viewing. For USA audiences in particular, who thrive on both communal horror experiences and personal interpretations, this film is built to engage on multiple levels, making it more than just a one-time scare. When analyzing The Strangers, Chapter 2, it is impossible to ignore how it fits within the larger horror landscape and how it measures against films that share its DNA. This sequel naturally invites comparison not only to the original The Strangers from 2008, but also to films that operate within the same subgenre of home invasion and psychological terror. These comparisons highlight both what the sequel achieves and where it may fall short, offering audiences a clear picture of its place in contemporary horror. The most immediate point of comparison is Brian Bertino's The Strangers, the film that established the now iconic image of masked intruders terrorizing an innocent couple. The first film was defined by its simplicity, slow burn pacing, and minimal use of exposition. It thrived on silence and ambiguity, and audiences remember it for its chilling line, "Because you were home." The Strangers, Chapter 2 carries that DNA forward but amplifies it with a slightly larger scale, more elaborate set pieces, and a broader exploration of the killer's tactics. While the original leaned heavily on restraint, this sequel sometimes accelerates into more overt violence, which may divide audiences. Fans of the minimalist dread of the first film may find this one more conventional, while those seeking higher intensity will appreciate its sharper edge. Another clear point of comparison is the Purge franchise. Both series revolve around the idea of masked attackers invading the sanctity of home, though The Purge adds a dystopian societal framework as its justification. The Strangers, Chapter 2 strips away that political explanation, keeping its terror rooted in randomness. This lack of motive sets it apart. Where The Purge comments directly on societal inequality and violence, The Strangers, Chapter 2 focuses instead on the universal fear of senseless intrusion. In this way, it is leaner but also less thematically ambitious. USA audiences familiar with The Purge might find The Strangers, Chapter 2 more intimate and grounded, but less layered in terms of broader commentary. You can also see the influence of films like Funny Games, both the original Austrian version by Michael Haneke and its American remake. Funny Games shares with The Strangers franchise a fascination with sadistic intruders who toy with their victims. However, Hanke's work is explicitly meta, critiquing audience consumption of violence. The Strangers, Chapter 2 does not reach for that level of commentary, instead embracing horror conventions earnestly. This makes it more accessible to mainstream audiences, but less philosophically rich when compared side by side. Hush, directed by Mike Flanagan, is another modern home invasion story worth mentioning. That film innovated by centering on a deaf protagonist, forcing the story to use silence and non-verbal tension in inventive ways. The Strangers, Chapter 2 does not introduce such a radical twist, but it does experiment with pacing and visual tension to achieve a similar level of audience discomfort. Hush shows how a small shift in perspective can refresh the subgenre, while The Strangers, Chapter 2 operates more traditionally. In this regard, it succeeds as a continuation of its franchise but does not innovate at the same level. From a stylistic perspective, comparisons to John Carpenter's Halloween are also relevant. The use of long takes, shadows, and masked figures lurking in the background draws heavily from Carpenter's visual language. Just as Michael Myers became an embodiment of silent evil, the masked intruders in The Strangers, Chapter 2 continue to function as faceless archetypes of fear. However, Carpenter's work built an entire mythology around its killer, while this film remains committed to keeping its antagonists unknowable. This choice strengthens its sense of realism but also limits character depth. When viewed against modern horror trends, particularly the rise of elevated horror from studios like A24, The Strangers, Chapter 2 feels less experimental. Movies such as Hereditary or The Witch layer supernatural elements with heavy psychological themes, while this film stays grounded in human evil. For some USA audiences, that directness is refreshing. It does not hide behind metaphors but instead confronts the primal fear of random violence. Others may see it as less ambitious when compared to genre peers pushing boundaries with form and narrative experimentation. In terms of the director's vision, if compared to past horror projects within the franchise or similar suspense-driven thrillers, the sequel shows more confidence in staging and atmosphere. It borrows the quiet dread of the first film but adds modern pacing techniques. This aligns it closer to recent Blumhouse-style thrillers that balance tension with accessibility. The benefit of this approach is that it can appeal to a wide range of audiences. The drawback is that it risks blending into the larger field of contemporary horror without distinguishing itself as boldly unique. Ultimately, The Strangers, Chapter 2 succeeds in honoring its predecessors while carving out a space within the broader conversation of home invasion films. It borrows smartly from classics like Halloween and Funny Games, echoes the intimacy of Hush, and stands apart from the dystopian spectacle of The Purge by emphasizing senseless randomness. It may not surpass its influences in ambition or innovation, but it delivers enough chilling moments to earn its place as a solid continuation of the franchise. For USA audiences familiar with the horror genre, its effectiveness lies not in reinventing the formula but in executing it with enough precision to leave a lasting impact. Symbolism and metaphor play an important role in how The Strangers, Chapter 2 communicates its ideas beyond the surface story of a woman pursued by faceless killers. While at first glance the film is a straightforward home invasion thriller expanded to wider settings, careful viewing reveals a web of recurring images, colors, and objects that carry thematic weight. These choices are not accidental, and they give the movie a resonance that lingers long after the immediate scares fade. For USA audiences who pay attention to visual language, these symbols add depth to an otherwise straightforward narrative. One of the most persistent symbols throughout the film is the mask. The three intruders, identified only by their blank and stylized coverings, represent both anonymity and universality. By hiding their faces, they become interchangeable and dehumanized, suggesting that evil can come from anywhere and from anyone. The masks also symbolize the erasure of individuality, forcing viewers to see them not as people with motives but as living embodiments of senseless violence. The film reinforces this by never showing the attackers' true faces for more than fleeting moments, ensuring that they remain metaphors for unpredictability and fear. Another strong motif is the use of doors and thresholds. Repeatedly, the story places Maya in positions where she must pass through or defend a doorway, whether in the hospital, in her temporary shelter, or in isolated rural buildings. Doors serve as both physical and psychological barriers, representing safety on one side and chaos on the other. The tension of the film often comes from the uncertainty of whether a door will hold, collapse, or betray its promise of safety. For American audiences especially familiar with suburban life, where the locked door symbolizes comfort and control, the repeated breaking of thresholds becomes a metaphor for vulnerability in places we consider most secure. Lighting and color also function as symbolic devices. The movie favors a muted palette, with shadows dominating much of the cinematography. Darkness naturally conveys fear, but The Strangers, Chapter 2 uses it symbolically to represent the unknown and Maya's fractured state of mind. Conversely, moments of brighter lighting, often around brief respites or human connection, symbolize fleeting hope. When the attackers disrupt those moments, the return to shadow emphasizes the fragility of safety. Red lighting or blood imagery appears sparingly but effectively, symbolizing both danger and the irreversible nature of trauma. The use of silence versus sound becomes another metaphor. In several key sequences, silence dominates, with the absence of music amplifying the character's isolation. Silence represents not peace but the oppressive weight of being watched, of waiting for inevitable intrusion. When sound does crash in, whether a sudden bang or the distorted hum of the score, it becomes symbolic of chaos breaking the fragile illusion of order. This interplay mirrors the emotional roller coaster of trauma recovery, where quiet moments can be as unsettling as overt conflict. Vehicles also carry symbolic weight in the narrative. Maya's attempts to escape often involve cars, buses, or rural roads, yet mobility proves unreliable. Cars fail to start, roads lead to ambushes, and escape routes collapse. These repeated failures symbolize the inescapable nature of fear and the illusion of control. In a country like the United States, where mobility and freedom of movement are core cultural values, the breakdown of vehicles as tools of safety works as a metaphor for the fragility of independence in the face of unrelenting threats. One of the more subtle symbols is Maya herself, portrayed with both vulnerability and resilience. Her survival becomes a metaphor for endurance in the face of meaningless violence. She embodies not only individual trauma but also the broader cultural fear of random violence that resonates strongly with USA audiences, where news cycles frequently highlight acts of senseless brutality. Maya's arc transforms her into a symbolic figure of perseverance, though the film refuses to grant her a neat or comforting conclusion, keeping the metaphor honest and raw. Mirrors appear sparingly but with impact, particularly in moments where Maya sees herself fractured or bloodied. Mirrors symbolize the loss of identity, the shattering of self-image, and the confrontation with a version of oneself shaped by trauma. Each glance reflects her transformation from victim to survivor, but also her inability to return to who she once was. For the audience, these moments visually convey the psychological scars that words alone cannot. Even the setting itself works metaphorically. Hospitals, rural houses, and lonely highways represent supposed spaces of recovery, community, and mobility, yet each becomes compromised. The design of these spaces underscores the idea that nowhere is safe when randomness is the true antagonist. These environments become metaphors for the betrayal of social structures that should protect us. The Strangers, Chapter 2 also uses repetition as metaphor. The killers return again and again, their persistence mirroring the way trauma itself revisits survivors long after an event ends. The lack of finality in the attacks symbolizes the inescapability of fear, suggesting that what has been broken cannot easily be repaired. This repetition speaks powerfully to USA audiences familiar with cyclical trauma, whether personal or collective. Ultimately, the symbolism and metaphors in The Strangers, Chapter 2 work to deepen the horror beyond jump scares. Masks symbolize anonymity and the universality of evil, doors and thresholds embody fragile safety, lighting conveys emotional states, and broken escape routes symbolize the futility of control. Together these elements ensure that the movie resonates not only as a thriller but also as a reflection on vulnerability, survival, and the randomness of violence. By paying attention to these layers, audiences can see that the film is not only about physical survival but also about the symbolic weight of living in a world where safety can never be fully guaranteed. The Strangers, Chapter 2 exists as part of a trilogy, and understanding its place within the franchise is essential to appreciating its choices. While it functions as a standalone horror film, it also continues a larger narrative arc that began with The Strangers, Chapter 1 and sets the stage for the concluding installment, The Strangers, Chapter 3. For longtime fans, this sequel operates as both a continuation and an expansion, weaving in callbacks, familiar motifs, and Easter eggs that make the experience richer for those who know the series' history. For new viewers, it offers enough context to work independently, though the sense of payoff is greater if you have seen the first entry. The original Strangers film, released in 2008, became a cult hit for its stripped-down simplicity. A couple is stalked in their vacation home by three masked strangers, with the unnerving explanation for their torment being, because you were home. That randomness became the hallmark of the franchise, the idea that violence does not always have a reason, and that safety is never guaranteed. This idea carries directly into The Strangers, Chapter 2, where the attackers return not because of revenge, wealth, or ideology, but because cruelty itself is their defining characteristic. In continuity terms, the sequel maintains the franchise's refusal to provide concrete backstories for the killers, keeping them terrifyingly faceless. What The Strangers, Chapter 2 does expand upon is scale. While the first film was almost entirely confined to a single home, this entry broadens the geography to include hospitals, back roads, and rural safehouses. This shift in setting represents a natural evolution in the story. It shows that the danger does not stop at one property or family, but instead spreads outward, reinforcing the notion that the attackers could appear anywhere. For franchise context, this widening of scope is a deliberate choice that sets the stage for the third chapter, which is expected to further escalate the conflict. Fans can see this as a progression, from intimacy in Chapter 1, to expansion in Chapter 2, to ultimate confrontation in Chapter 3. There are also several callbacks that serve as connective tissue for longtime viewers. The killer's masks, identical in design to those from the earlier films, are the most obvious. Their silence, their habit of appearing in the background before striking, and the use of long stretches of stillness all recall the stylistic DNA of the first film. Even small details, like the rhythmic knocking on doors or the slow circling of a victim before attacking, echo moments fans will recognize. These choices create a continuity of dread that binds the films together while still allowing this chapter to introduce new set pieces and scenarios. Another layer of franchise context is thematic rather than literal. The Strangers films have always been about the fragility of normalcy. In Chapter 1, that fragility was represented by a couple's strained relationship unraveling under the weight of random violence. In Chapter 2, the focus shifts to Maya's personal trauma and resilience, representing how violence lingers and transforms survivors. By doing so, this sequel deepens the franchise's thematic arc, suggesting that survival is not simply about escaping once but about enduring repeated intrusion into one's sense of safety. For USA audiences, this continuity resonates strongly in a cultural climate where random acts of violence often leave survivors carrying lifelong scars. The film also contains Easter eggs for attentive fans. Props, background references, and even certain lines of dialogue echo the first film. These touches are not essential to the story but serve as rewards for viewers invested in the series. They remind audiences that this is part of a carefully designed trilogy rather than a loose sequel. At the same time, the decision to withhold definitive explanations for the killer's identities or motives is itself a form of continuity, preserving the original's commitment to ambiguity. When considering historical context, the Strangers franchise has always drawn from real-world fears rather than dramatizing specific events. While the first film was loosely marketed as being based on true events, its actual inspiration was a combination of home invasion stories and the Manson family murders, filtered through fiction. Chapter 2 continues this tradition of cultural resonance rather than historical accuracy. It reflects anxieties about safety in domestic spaces, mobility, and the unpredictability of violence. In that sense, it belongs to a long lineage of American horror films that use random violence as metaphor, from Halloween to Funny Games. Placing The Strangers, Chapter 2 within this broader horror history, it is clear that the film operates in conversation with both its own franchise and with the home invasion subgenre as a whole. Its expansion of scope mirrors how many horror sequels escalate, but its refusal to provide clear backstory maintains continuity with its roots. This balance is important for USA audiences who expect sequels to both grow and remain faithful. In conclusion, The Strangers, Chapter 2 is a bridge in the trilogy, carrying forward the DNA of the original while expanding the canvas for future developments. Its callbacks, masks, silent killers, and echoes of the first film provide continuity, while its larger scale and character-driven trauma arc advance the story. For longtime fans, these elements confirm that the franchise remains committed to its unsettling core. For new viewers, it offers a chilling entry point that stands on its own but becomes richer when understood as part of the larger tapestry. When considering The Strangers, Chapter 2, one of the most fascinating aspects to examine is how its budget translates onto the screen and how those production choices affect its box office potential. Horror has long been a genre where financial efficiency often trumps blockbuster spending, with many of the most successful films operating on restrained budgets while generating impressive returns. For this installment, The Strangers, Chapter 2 is reported to have a budget in the range of $20 to $25 million, which positions it as a mid-level production for the horror genre. This figure is significant when compared to indie horror projects that thrive on shoestring budgets, as well as larger-scale studio horror projects that sometimes exceed $40 million. The challenge for the filmmakers lies in maximizing every dollar to create an atmosphere of dread, tension, and authenticity without leaning heavily on expensive spectacle. What becomes clear is that the money has been spent wisely, particularly in areas that matter most for audience immersion. Practical effects and strong production design play a central role in heightening the realism of the story. Unlike horror projects that sink budgets into CGI-heavy sequences, The Strangers, Chapter 2 leans into its core strengths: suspenseful pacing, unsettling visuals, and carefully constructed set pieces. This frugality can actually work in the film's favor. By forcing the filmmakers to focus on performance, atmosphere, and small but effective details, the film avoids unnecessary bloat while delivering tension that resonates with audiences. This approach aligns with the legacy of the original Strangers film, which proved that less can be more when terror is derived from the unknown rather than oversized spectacle. From a marketing perspective, the mid-level budget also influences strategy. A horror release like The Strangers, Chapter 2 does not need the type of global marketing push reserved for superhero blockbusters. Instead, it can succeed with targeted campaigns that appeal directly to core horror audiences, fans of the franchise, and viewers who engage heavily on social media with horror content. Teasers, trailers, and viral marketing that lean into the unnerving and mysterious nature of the film provide cost-effective promotion while driving curiosity. Word of mouth and audience reactions will also play a critical role in its financial trajectory. Horror films, more than most genres, can rise or fall on audience chatter, with strong buzz translating into extended box office legs well beyond opening weekend. Looking at box office potential, the expectations are quite realistic but promising. With a budget of around 20 to 25 million, the film does not need to break records to be considered a success. Even a domestic gross of 50 to 60 million would put it firmly in profitable territory, especially when supplemented by international sales, streaming rights, and eventual home media revenue. Horror audiences tend to show up reliably when marketing taps into the right fear and when the franchise name already carries recognition. The Strangers brand, having established itself as a cult favorite since the original 2008 release, gives this sequel a built-in audience, which helps guarantee a solid baseline performance. Beyond opening weekend, the sustainability of box office returns will depend on how effectively the film resonates emotionally with viewers. If audiences find themselves genuinely unsettled, discussing their favorite tense moments, and recommending the film to others, its performance will likely exceed initial projections. Conversely, if reviews frame it as overly derivative or less impactful than earlier installments, it may see a sharper drop-off. Still, horror's relatively low threshold for profitability allows even modest box office showings to be celebrated as victories, especially when secondary revenue streams are factored in. It is also worth noting that horror has been one of the most reliable genres in Hollywood when it comes to return on investment. Films like Get Out, The Conjuring, and even smaller projects like Paranormal Activity prove that audiences are willing to pay for shared experiences of fear and suspense. The Strangers, Chapter 2 is positioned to tap into that same audience psychology. The film's mid-tier budget gives it room to look polished while not risking the kind of financial failure that comes with a blockbuster-sized investment. This balance is key in ensuring long-term profitability. Ultimately, The Strangers, Chapter 2 shows how a smartly managed budget can enhance rather than hinder a film. By prioritizing atmosphere, cast performances, and well-crafted suspense over flashy effects, the production makes every dollar count. On the financial side, its relatively modest budget sets it up for a high likelihood of success, even without massive box office numbers. For audiences, this translates into a film that feels tense and immersive without being overproduced. For the studio, it represents a calculated bet that plays into horror's proven ability to deliver strong returns. In the end, the budget of around $20 to $25 million does not just support the film's creation, it shapes the very identity of The Strangers, Chapter 2 and its chances of becoming a profitable addition to the franchise. When it comes to experiencing The Strangers, Chapter 2, the question of where to watch is just as important as the film itself. The way a horror movie is viewed can significantly alter the tension, emotional impact, and overall atmosphere. This installment of the Strangers franchise relies heavily on mood, suspense, and the immersive quality of its visuals and sound design. Because of that, audiences will want to consider carefully whether to seek it out on the big screen, wait for its streaming release, or watch it at home through digital rental or purchase. Each option offers distinct advantages and trade-offs, and the best choice depends on what kind of experience viewers are looking for. For those who want to maximize impact, seeing The Strangers, Chapter 2 in theaters is the most powerful option. Horror films, especially ones built around psychological dread and sudden bursts of violence, thrive in the collective energy of a movie theater. The big screen emphasizes the scale of the cinematography, allowing details like claustrophobic interiors or wide, desolate outdoor shots to envelop the viewer. Sound design is also far more effective in a theater setting, where the creak of a floorboard, a sudden knock at the door, or a whispered line can echo through the space and trigger a visceral reaction. Watching with an audience amplifies the tension, as shared gasps and nervous laughter add to the atmosphere. For viewers who want the most intense version of the film, theatrical viewing is hard to beat. Streaming is another key avenue for experiencing The Strangers, Chapter 2, and it appeals to audiences who value accessibility and convenience. Major streaming platforms often secure rights to horror releases within a few months of their theatrical run. Streaming allows viewers to control the environment, pausing during tense moments, rewatching key scenes, or enjoying the movie at their own pace. However, the experience depends heavily on the setup. Watching on a large television with the lights dimmed and a quality sound system or headphones can create a level of immersion close to that of a theater. By contrast, streaming casually on a laptop or phone may diminish the atmosphere, reducing the impact of carefully designed soundscapes and visuals. For viewers who enjoy the flexibility of watching at home but still want to feel the suspense, investing in a proper setup enhances the experience significantly. Digital rental or purchase also provides a middle ground between theatrical release and streaming subscriptions. These releases typically appear earlier than subscription streaming availability, giving audiences who miss the theatrical run a chance to catch the film while it is still fresh in cultural conversation. Renting allows for a one-time viewing, which is often ideal for horror films that thrive on initial surprise and tension. Purchasing digitally, on the other hand, benefits those who enjoy revisiting horror movies to catch details and foreshadowing they may have missed the first time. The Strangers, Chapter 2, with its focus on atmosphere and unsettling imagery, offers plenty of moments worth re-examining. Subtle gestures, background elements, or repeated motifs may stand out more on rewatch, making ownership appealing for dedicated fans. For home viewing, the context matters greatly. Watching The Strangers, Chapter 2 with headphones can amplify the sound design, making the film more personal and unsettling. In this format, small sounds like breathing, distant footsteps, or faint rustling take on an almost intrusive quality, immersing the viewer directly into the terror. Watching with friends or family can also be rewarding, since horror often sparks lively reactions and discussions. Group viewing makes the tension more bearable for some, while for others it heightens the fun of experiencing scares together. On the other hand, solo viewing in a dark, quiet room can replicate the isolation the characters feel, making the film's horror even more effective. The decision also depends on what audiences want from the film. If the goal is to feel every ounce of dread and suspense as intended by the filmmakers, theaters provide the ultimate format. If convenience and the ability to customize the environment matter most, streaming is the better choice. For those who value ownership and rewatchability, digital purchase ensures repeated access. Each avenue has strengths, but what matters most is how the viewing environment shapes the reception of the story. Ultimately, The Strangers, Chapter 2 is versatile in its effectiveness. Its scares and atmosphere work well in multiple settings, though the intensity may differ. The theatrical route offers the most immersive experience, making it ideal for fans who want to feel the movie's full impact. Streaming and digital options provide comfort and flexibility, appealing to those who want to control their surroundings or revisit the story. Whether in theaters or at home, the film delivers suspense and unease, but the choice of where to watch allows each viewer to tailor the experience to their own comfort level. This flexibility ensures that no matter the format, audiences will find themselves pulled into the unsettling world the film creates. If you enjoyed this video and would like us to provide reviews of every kind of movie, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Have a great day, and we'll see you in the next video.
Goodbye.